This happened in 2013 to one of my friends who was 16 at the time. Her name was May, and she was born in the month of May, so that's why her name makes more sense to why her name's been that. May was about 16 at the time in 2013, and she used to be home alone a lot. Why was she home alone was because mainly her parents both worked in the medical field. They would work long hours at night sometimes, which explains why May is like mostly home alone. The only time she's not home alone is if one of the parents were home or if her older brother was there. Her older brother is a college student, but he does visit them and stays with them during holidays and even the weekends. This happened to be on a weekday, so May was all by herself. Since it was probably Wednesday, she had a homework project assignment that she had to get it done by the next day. While May was doing her homework while being home alone, she actually liked the quietness and didn't have to worry about anyone disrupting her while she works. While she's working, she heard what seemed to be a tap on the window. She honestly got up thinking that maybe it might have been a tree branch, but it didn't look like it. Keep in mind that this was during March and it was before March break, so it was obvious that it might have been maybe freezing rain, but the forecast said there was no freezing rain or hail. She thought that maybe someone might have thrown a snowball, as she didn't see anyone in the yard, but assumed that it could have been the other kids next door. So while she was doing her homework, she was mainly finishing up writing the assignment when she looked to hear a sound of someone banging what seemed to be on the door. Thinking that it could have been an emergency, as one of her parents might have been doing it, she ran downstairs. As she ran downstairs, she looked at the door, but there was no one there. She opened up the door and called out if anyone was there, but there was no one there, and assumed that maybe it might have been some people pranking her. The ding-dong ditch. She closed the door and just continued to do her homework when she all of a sudden started to hear cries coming from outside. May stopped what she was doing, but she was confused as to who was crying. All she knows is that there was no one in the house besides her. She looked out the window and she could see that there was someone crying outside. They appeared to be just sitting outside of the porch. Not right outside her porch, but the outside of the neighbor's porch. It appeared to be a young woman at the age of 16, same age as May, and she was confused as to why this woman was there. There was no one with her. So May called the neighbors, which she known, and asked about the crying woman, and they said they saw no one. When as soon as May realized the horrible realization, the woman was actually gone. Then she appeared on one of the windows, peeping right through the door, crying as if she needed help. May ended up texting her dad, but her dad called at least a few minutes later, saying to call the cops, as he had no idea what this woman was doing. As May stared at this woman, when she looked around, she realized the woman was not on the window. She apparently might have left, as May looked around her house to make sure that this woman had no means of trying to break in another way. But thankfully, though there wasn't any way this woman would have broken in. So May ended up calling the cops, and while she was on the phone, police arrived on scene, and May gave a good description. She said she couldn't get a good look at the woman, as it was too far away for her to tell, but explained the crying and that. The cops searched the whole area and patrolled the area that night, but they couldn't find anything. Whatever that experience May had on that night while she was home alone was completely paranormal. Now, this was back sometime in 2016. One of my friends named Steve used to hang out with a bunch of people. However, though, when he hanged out with a bunch of people, he does get in some sort of shenanigans. Anything from going to public places past a certain time to do crazy stuff, or even go as far as trying to sneak out of the house in the middle of the night. Steve had always enjoyed doing things that teenagers do. It's kind of like his getaway whenever he didn't have school. Now, keep in mind he was probably 19 or 20 at the time of this story, and this happened in the summer. It was just after school had let off for the summer. Steve decided to invite his friend named Mike over to his house, as Mike's parents were not home. However, though, Mike suggested the idea for Steve to come over to his house to have a sleepover, since his parents were going to be away for the weekend. Steve asked his parents if it'd be okay if he slept over at Mike's, which they didn't seem to mind, seeing that Mike and Steve were close friends at the time. Steve got all of his stuff and headed over to Mike's house, which thankfully he only lived a few blocks down, so he didn't really need a car. But of course he drove his car over to Mike's, as Mike wanted to do something really fun. They thought that they could have been, just doing what teenagers do, but Mike had a really great idea. Mike had suggested to Steve that they go to an old elementary school that was abandoned. However, though, they went there, and when they got there, they realized that there was no one there, no cars or policemen. The two were just doing their own thing, and they were basically just doing what they normally do, play around and etc. However, though, they ended up realizing that there was some police cars and sirens in the distance. Now, that was when they just got out of school. They quickly jumped into their car and sped off, which thankfully they took the long way, just to make sure they weren't being followed. However, they were back in Mike's house, and that's when something gets really wrong. Mike, along with Steve, were just chilling in the bedroom, mainly just doing nothing, when all of a sudden, something really weird started happening. Apparently, from what they can see, they actually saw what seemed to be a figure staring at the bedroom window of Mike's place. Mike honestly had no idea who this was, so Steve got a little confused as to why this person was staring at their window. Apparently, Mike had said to them to get out and that he has a gun and is not afraid to use it. This seemed to get attention of this figure and took off. However, Mike and Steve ended up calling the cops, but they thought that it was just BS, so they left that night. However, though, it was until the next few hours, might have been around 4 a.m, when Mike woke up to hearing his window clash. It sounded as if someone took a baseball bat and smashed it on the window. Mike looked to see that the figure had somehow bursted through the front window and as somehow is getting his way in. He was about 5'9", and he definitely had a baseball bat and a crowbar on him. Apparently he did not see Mike, so Mike ended up sneaking Steve out of the house and into the woods. When they went to the woods and they headed over to a neighbor's house, they called the cops and explained to them what happened. The man was arrested, but there was any chance of why he broke in. Apparently someone said that he was mentally ill, and apparently he had been charged for murder, theft, and even assault. This man was arrested, and they have never seen him again. Mike and Steve now are too afraid to be sleeping over when no parents were at either of their houses. However, though, they got over that pretty much within a few months of therapy, because apparently a week after this, Mike has suffered some severe PTSD, and he is afraid to either have a sleepover when no parent was there to watch them. However, though, when Mike started living with his girlfriend, and the same with Steve, they became more wiser as to what happened, and they are not afraid to be alone so much. They moved to certain places, and this was the only time they saw each other before they parted ways. They had no idea what this man was doing or what he was capable of. But something had to say, something definitely told them that this man, whatever his intentions he had, was definitely not good. For some context of what made this scary, this happened to me sometime in the summer of 2019. Now, this was around the time when my dad apparently was working late and my mom was out of town for a few days. Now, this was sometime after I just got back from a really stressful full day. I mainly had some issues with some stuff and some people. Now, keep in mind, this was in July, so it was around the summertime. So I decided to head to bed really early. I don't know what it was, but I think it was sometime, I guess, around 11 or something. I headed to bed after a long day. I was on my phone, mainly just texting my friends and just chatting with them for a little bit. As I was chatting with them, though, I ended up hearing what seemed to be like someone or something shuffling in my bedroom. Now, I was the only one in there with my door closed, so there was no way anyone could be in my room. Now, I looked over, but I saw no one. I even turned on my light to make sure no one was there, and there was nobody there. I even looked under my bed, even though you can't really fit under there, because my bed is not that high enough for anyone to hide under, unless they were very, very slim and knew how to get there. I ended up looking over to see that there was someone there, but I had absolutely no idea as to who was under the bed. I looked but couldn't see anything, so I'm assuming it could have been maybe just some sort of hallucination. I ended up going to bed, and I woke up about maybe 7 in the morning. Obviously, I thought it was 7, but then I looked to realize that my phone said it was actually 5 in the morning. I ended up looking around, but then I realized I heard something from under my bed. I ended up looking under, but I realized that there was actually some thing in there. I honestly didn't know what it was, but after I turned on the lights and got a good look, I realized that there was no one under the bed, and I honestly didn't even know if I was hallucinating or not, as I had no idea what this thing was even doing or how it got there. I ended up realizing that maybe something might have been just playing tricks on me. However, though, I didn't really know if this thing was just paranormal or maybe I was hallucinating. I ended up going back to sleep, but then I realized now that I am a lot wiser and older, probably 23, well, that's what I am, going to be 24, even though I may not be perfect, I believe what I've experienced was something paranormal, or it was mainly just my imagination playing tricks on me. This story isn't really the longest or anything like that, but this actually happened to one of my friends who was babysitting while home alone. Now, my friend, which we'll call her by Sydney, was in her early 20s, and she was babysitting for 2 kids. 2 of them were both 5 and 2, so she would be home alone most of the time while babysitting. However, since she knew the neighbors and same with her family very well, once in a while that the kids would come over to her house. As they were over at Sydney's house one day. They were playing in the yard while just doing their normal thing. However, as Sally was looking up, she was the 5-year-old daughter, looked to see that there was a very large van. This van apparently had someone who appeared to be a man in his 60s who walked over to the kids and said there is free candy in the van and that they can go get some. However, Sydney ended up looking up and say, "Hey, what are you doing with those kids?" This got the man to get back in the van and quickly drove off. Apparently, this was one of the scariest babysitting stories she's ever had while home alone. Apparently, this one definitely takes the prize, and this prompted to get Sydney to realize that this man was probably trying to attempt to kidnap the kids while she was distracted. Now Sydney has installed security cameras, and she's never saw that van again.